I'm Meta Spencer, and I want to ask you a question. Do you think that drones can plant 1 trillion trees? Well, we're going to talk about that idea. It's a pretty far-fetched idea, but if you will remember, in October, the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, warned the world that we have 12 years in which to save the planet. That is to say, we have to cut in half the carbon emissions that we produce annually by 12 years from now. And that is simply not possible. We're already way past the possibility of doing that. Otherwise, we're going to have some catastrophes. So the only thing to do now instead is to suck carbon out of the atmosphere that's already been floating around and put it underground or lock it up in some way. So there are a number of ways of doing that. Some of the technologies are being developed at present, but they're not ready yet. What we do have ready are very old-fashioned technologies. That is, taking care of the soil through farming, putting plants into the soil through their roots, and forestry, because plants absorb carbon out of the atmosphere and put them away, either as wood products, or as additions to the soil. So that we have. Now, there are, as I understand it, about 3 trillion trees on the planet at present. And we need another 1 trillion or 1.5 trillion if we really want to do this. That's too many. It was almost unbelievably challenging. I don't think we can do quite that, but we better do our best because we have 12 years in which to do it. Okay, so what do you do if you're going to plant 1 trillion trees? Remember, 1 trillion is 1,000 billion. So even if you plant 1 billion trees a year, that's sort of a drop in the bucket. And I am now on line with a person who's going to tell us how they are planting 1 billion trees a year, or plan to do so. And they're doing it with drones. So I'm Meta Spencer, and here are my guests today. Here in Toronto with me in their own office is Professor Sandy Smith, who's a professor of forestry at the University of Toronto, and her PhD student, Eric Davies, who is very interested in making sure that the trees that get planted are indigenous and are not invasive species, because if we plant the wrong kind of trees, we can do an awful lot of harm. So those are the people who are trying to keep us honest and on the straight and narrow. And in Oxford, England, we have Eman Hamdan.
Yes.
And here's Eman. Say hello.
Hello.
Sandy, if you and Eric will each say hello, we can get a look at you.
Hello.
Good.
Hello.
All right. Now, here's the idea that I got fascinated by seeing some videos of Carbon Engineering, a company in Britain that has been using drones to plant trees. And the question is how they can plant a hell of a lot of trees, but how successful is that approach? Can we plant 1 billion trees a year, as they hope to do? And if they do, will they survive? Those trees, will they grow up? How many of them will live, and so on, without the kind of care that they might get otherwise? So, Eman, let us, if you give us sort of an image of what it is you do, your company, and then we will pile on and ask you hard questions about how promising this technology is and what the drawbacks may be. Eman.
Okay, so we aim, or our vision is to plant 1 billion tree a year. We are not there yet, but we are aiming to reach this vision. So our technology, it's proved very successful. We have very successful rates, and let's see, just 1 second, because Our plant scientists also want to join us in the call, so just 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Let's switch over while we're waiting and ask Sandy, do you think that this is a realistic possibility, Sandy, or are you skeptical?
No, I don't know if we can plant all trillion trees that way. I would be skeptical in the big picture. I think in the selective areas, I think this is probably a great technology. We've used rotary helicopter plantings in the past to plant this. Many areas are difficult to get to. So I think in the right situation, it's going to be an excellent option and an alternative. And I'm very supportive of any of the technologies that can allow us to do that. I also think it's important, though, to engage people and communities in tree planting. So I think whatever aspects or approaches we can take to plant more trees will always be positive.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear such an optimism. And Eman, I see you're back, and maybe you have a friend next to you.
Yes. This is Dr. Elena, and she's our head of partnership, head of plant science department, and she are able to answer anything regarding of the biology and how we have our trees. And how it's about the success rate and everything you need to know. But as I mentioned, we have this vision of a plant 1 billion tree a year. We're not there yet, but still we are a startup and we are developing our technology, and we're aiming to reach this within the next few years. It's mostly done, and our secret is not about the technology itself, but also it's about plant science and biology. And if I have any questions about this, Elena will be able to answer you with everything. Because even when we started the company, we had the first people who were employed, actually you, right? Yeah. So before we hired any engineer, we had a plant scientist, because we understand how important it is to have someone who are an expert in the field. So please go ahead with your question and let me.
Well, let's first talk about the whole technology, because I was surprised. Now, tell me if I'm wrong in the way I understand you work. I saw a video, and you have about six drones at a time that a person can control, and they come the first day and they fly about 6 feet off the ground and take a picture or map. You map the terrain, and what are you looking for? Rocks or something that might get in the way down below, or what? Do you try to assess how what the soil is like and what's available below, or do you what are you looking for when you map this terrain?
You want to go ahead, or
yeah?
Okay.
Well, the first drone, this is the mapping drone. So in the mapping drone, we currently have 2 sensors, and we are looking for have more capabilities in the drone that we have. We have a multi-spec camera. We have a high resolution camera. So with the high resolution, we can generate images of centimeters of resolution in the area that we have. With these images, we can discriminate, for example, the presence of exactly in an area in a field. We can know exactly if we have the presence of rocks or other materials that cannot allow to planting in this determining area. But also with the multi-spec, what we can do is normally we're doing the NDVI and different index to know exactly, for example, what is the level of moisture that we have in the soil, what is the level.
You can tell the moisture in the soil by looking.
I currently have this. We can do it an integration with the satellite images also. For example, I'm working with also the University of Oviedo, where I have a PhD student that we're trying to do, for example, correlation between the different bands of the spectrum in the satellite images. For example, with composition of the soil. For example, the levels, we find a very good correlation, for example, percentage of clay that we have in that soil.
Okay, so when you're mapping it, you're really getting an image of very, very specific images. Now, you're not going to shoot your seed into an area where you've spotted a rock. Is that the idea? So
exactly.
you know where to go to do.
Exactly. The idea is to map, to understand the areas, and then delimitate the areas where we shoot in the pots or we spread in the seeds in the surface. So we can do in point specific, quite specific, or exactly the areas where we wanted to plant certain species. So for example, I know that this in the corner southeast is the perfect composition for planting this because I don't have, I have a clean area with anything that is plants growing.
Okay. So now you do that one day, and the next day or so, you come back with a different drone that's full of a container full of some sort of little pods, right?
Yes.
And these pods contain some sort of gel that's a nutrient, right? And a seed, a tree seed, right?
Yeah.
And this has a gadget on it, sort of like a paintball shooter. And it shoots this pellet, this pod, into the soil. How deep does it go?
Well, it depends. First, this is one of the systems that we have to planting, that is the pots planting. But we also have other system to plant it that is more similar, that is the spreading of the seeds, just to deposit the seeds in the surface. In the pots, we have exactly what you explained. Is a container that we can put until 400 pots of this material.
And they can be mixed up, so they can have a diversity.
Yeah, so we can mix it, everything. We can put different, I don't really recommend different species in a single pot. We have going for 1.7 centimeters, so very few space. I don't want it to, depending on the species that we planted, I don't want to, I usually to put a lot of seeds there to not, we can have problems of competition if we put in a lot of seeds inside. The composition inside the pots will vary depending on what we have in the field, what is the nutritional conditions and the species that we are planting. Not necessarily have to be, for example, a hydrogel. I'm tending to go for more organic materials, and I'm using, for example, a lot of biochar. And I'm using also promoters of the growing, like mycorrhizal bacteria, to do in the symbiosis with
fungi.
Yes.
Right. You put fungi in these pods with
yeah.
You do. Well, how nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the penetration is it will depend a lot of the hardness of the soil. So for us,
so you can actually control how deep these are going to go.
Limited factor. So it could be dependent of the height of the range of the drone flying, the forces that we apply to the drone, but the main factor limitation is the hardness of the soil. So we can control until certain degrees. Of course, if we have a compression layer over the 10 centimeters or the first 10 centimeters, it's quite difficult to achieve the penetration. So,
okay, now let me ask you, you have these two technologies. Some of them you just scatter your seeds and go away. Some of them you do this pod business, which was, of course, the fascinating thing to me. I never heard of such an idea. But how much better, or tell me the success rate of the two approaches. If you shoot these things into the ground, do they have a much better success rate? And tell me, the main thing that occurred to me is how many of these trees survive and grow up?
So, for example, I tended to use, for example, that two techniques depending on the environment that we're going to plant. So the material, for example, that we do in the pots, we need a lot of water to remove the materials, and the materials decompose as faster as we can. So we try at the first trials, for example, in Australia, to try with the two techniques. So the results that I have currently, for example, is in pots is quite negative, but in the spreading species like eucalyptus, acacias, we have better results than planting with pot. But in the other hand, I cannot tell you the percentage because it's a private customer, that is a mining customer, and I cannot disclose yet the percentage that we have.
Well, obviously,
On the other hand,
the people who are critical of this, if they're going to be critical,
yeah,
are going to say, well, really, you need to, and I'm going to ask Eric to jump in a second, at least, because Eric is very worried about the fact that tree planting is not an art exactly, but you have to actually individually plant trees and look after them, and it's hard to do, and unless you do it right, they're not going to live. So tell me, compare, if you will, the success rate of any of your technologies. You have 2% success rate.
No, 32.
32% survival of these mangroves.
Of mangrove.
Mangrove, okay. And 32 of them come up and, okay.
And established, yeah.
Are established, okay.
After, yeah.
2 or 3 plants per metric square.
Yeah, in mangrove.
Will survive if you just scatter the seed.
No, it's currently, I sprayed the seeds. It's not currently surviving. It's currently growing and established in the last plantation that we have in September.
It's an aquatic forest type. So
yeah.
I guess I on some of the videos, I guess I thought it was more kind of the terrestrial. Did you say the stuff in Myanmar and the mangroves is seed scattering, or are you growing the little seedlings and then planting them?
No. It's directly from seeds.
From seeds. And then,
yeah, so we currently working especially because as I say, the pots, we're trying the 2 techniques, especially the pots, for example. I said that in Myanmar, I cannot, in the case of Australia, we have worse results with the pots, better results with the spreading. Until the mining company have the final results, I cannot say exactly the percentage of survival that we have in the mining area.
I mean, what I'm hearing, it makes a lot of sense for what we're trying to do. I think it's a huge challenge in Australia, and I think that's coming through, Elena, because you've got very different sites, much drier.
Yeah.
And it strikes me, I mean, we've done a lot of work, and I don't know if you guys have looked at it in Canada, because again, like Australia, remote areas, mining, logs without roads.
We try and we tried last year in May. We stayed with the Alberta Research Center, and I do a plantation in Edmonton. We have a fire after the plantation.
You know, fire, that's a lot of our forest is naturally burned over time. So, and there's a lot of replanting or reseeding after fires. So that might be an advantage. I mean, what I'm thinking, you've picked the extremes, Australia and mangrove, Myanmar, like, and then of course Canada's somewhere in the middle. I think, like all research, it's going to just take time to figure out which seeds can be grown under what conditions, and whether your approach can be applied. I mean, Meta's very, I would say, optimistic or ambitious to hope that we could do it all with drones, but I'm a little more skeptical, is that there's going to be the specialized application.
There is limitation in the species that we can plant, of course. First, one is the size that we have to develop. Not all these species can fit in the current system. So I'm currently working with Sims eucalyptus Sims eucalyptus, the size of eucalyptus seeds. That is something that we sprayed with no problem, and they can fit perfectly in the pots. 2 big seeds. I'm working also in a possible project in Belize. So we are speaking about seeds of like butter beans, or for example, we want to increase the potential of planting in mangroves with seeds like avicennias. So it's like 3-4 centimeters. So we are currently in that range. And also it's just all the mechanicals that I have, even in the shooting in the pots or spreading, it depends on the texture or how the seeds is, the structure, the physiology of the seeds.
You know, I'm thinking mine remediation, and we have been looking at some of this from a different aspect with use of biochars and other sorts of materials that can mitigate the impacts of these sites. I mean, mine restoration is probably, well, I was going to say relatively easy because of the sites. I mean, you don't have stumps and downwood and dead and what you're describing in Alberta or Canada it's pretty rough terrain, some of the areas we're in, whereas these mine sites, you know, they could really benefit from this approach if you can get to work on those.
Are you talking about where there's open surface mining, like, for example, in the oil sands? Could you restore an environment like that with forestry? Like, the oil sands, they don't even have any soil there at all, do they? It's just exposed to sandy. What have you done in an environment like that to make up for what's been taken away in Alberta?
So Meta, like, I haven't done it myself. It's colleagues that I know that are working that area. I mean, first of all, what you have to do is rehabilitate the site because the pH is so acidic. Like, you have to really shift that. You've got to try and get some nutrients, some organic matter if you can. That's why mycorrhiza or any of these sort of amendments that one can bring into these seedlings, the better. So the pod approach would be really nice if you could make it work or in some way fly those areas. Very remote. So yeah, I mean, you want to restore these sites. There's such extensive resource extraction around the world in all areas. And so if this approach could help, I think that would be great. I mean, because they're very difficult areas. There's not like there's lots of roads around them. Like, they are remote areas. And the requirements for the government, certainly in Canada, is that they have to be restored. Mining companies can't leave those sites unless they have reached a certain level of restoration or ecological, at least set it on its pathway towards a possibility of restoring the site. And that's where there could be huge gains in forests if you could do that. But, you know, that's very different than just sort of talking about reforesting areas we're cutting. And that's where, you know, countries like Canada, Australia, Europe, Asia, everywhere, we're all sort of grappling with, you know, the resource extraction, whether it's timber or mining or oil or whatever. How do we get what we want and leave or restore it back to the way nature should have it?
Let's get a wild guess about the number of trees that need to be planted in order to save the world in 12 years. That's my focus. And, you know, you guys have your own concerns. One, I know with Eric, and Sandy too, it's very much a question of making sure you don't plant the wrong kind of foreign trees that are going to do damage. And that's great, but I'm thinking in terms of fast-growing trees that can actually sequester carbon at a huge rate. And as I understand it, rapidly growing young trees are the ones that are sequestering carbon. Mature trees contain a lot of carbon, and you don't want to cut them down because you're going to put a lot of stuff back into the atmosphere that they have a reservoir for. So you want to keep the old trees, but you actually need to have a lot of young trees growing so as to sequester carbon. I saw one estimate that said 1.5 trillion trees would be enough to do the job. Well, of course, that's assuming that the only thing we're going to be doing is planting trees to save the world. And we're not going to get that many out. But how many do you think are reasonable? You can only plant trees, number one, where the farmers aren't already planning to grow crops. You don't want to take food out of people's mouths to plant trees. And I'm not sure how many plots of land, how many hectares of land in the world are really available for such planting. And then whether or not you can legally do it by just going out there and planting trees without asking permission, you know, of the owners and so on. So let's give some thought to this, consider it as a real project, that within 12 years we have to do this thing or we're in deep trouble. what do we do next? How do we go about this? How far can your Eman, maybe you want to hop in here and say what you think is feasible.
Well, actually, as a company, we contribute to solving a part of the problem, but it's not just our efforts. We have to be a calculative effort to work together to save the world, but we don't assume or claim that we save the world with our planting or our technology. This is first thing I want to say.
Somebody has to. If you don't, then we have to get somebody else. So it's your job, or we're in trouble.
Well, but we have for our technology or for our partnerships with organizations about the access for the land. We have a platform, not just a platform. We have a network of partners and organizations that we work with in Indonesia, Myanmar, Thailand, Madagascar, Haiti, that they have access to land and they have these agreements from the governments or the local government or land owners to restore and rehabilitate these sites or these areas. So let's say, for example, in Myanmar, we have now access to 51,000 hectares, and we can fundraise to restore these lands because the organizations that we work with have agreement with the government to restore these lands.
This is all mangrove territory.
Yes, in
Myanmar is mangrove. In other areas, for example, in Indonesia and Thailand, is peatland and mangroves.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sandy, do you have some thoughts about what is really feasible?
You know, it's whatever we can put our mind to and set these goals on. I worry, or I don't think about actual numbers, Meta, and I don't know where $1.5 trillion come from. And I guess yes, one wants trees growing fast, but I wouldn't want to put eucalyptus around the world. I think it has some challenges. So I think I'm going to pass it on to Eric in a minute, because I think it's really important to be reflective when we're doing this of the areas we're in. I do think, just as they're talking about in Myanmar and other countries, that there's lots of community engagement. I mentioned it earlier, and I think this is important, is that especially if you get out of this sort of intensive high production forestry and you look at how people want to live on the land, they want it more forested. I think there's agricultural systems. You're worried about, you know, loss of food, but I think there's many agroforestry systems that can work well for countries that aren't necessarily Canada, although they could work well for us here too in Southern Ontario and parts of Alberta, if we could get into that model. There's areas of the world too that could be restored. There's, you know, trees across the Sahara. The Sahara Desert is huge. If we could get the technology and put our mind to it, maybe eucalypt could work there. I don't know.
They say that some people are using wastewater from cities in the Sahara because I guess the challenge isn't so much planting trees in the Sahara as it is getting water for them, right?
Yeah, so I think it's just being innovative in all ways and thinking outside the box, or the tree planting. And that's what this company, I mean, using drones, it's about time that we've been able to do this. But there's a whole technology of figuring out how to, once you've got the drone, then what do the trees and the seedlings need, and how can you deliver it to them, and what tree seedlings can be appropriate for that. You can get things growing well. Yeah, the last point I'll make before I pass it to Eric is, I mean, in many cases, and I was thinking about Spain actually, when I was there, it was more in the south, but there's been a lot of pines been planted, and not just Spain, everywhere that happens in Canada, as restoration sites, because You know, in a forestry world, you have to get pines out there. They grow fast. They do what you want, meta is store carbon, but they're not going to stay there. They are just sort of creating an organic layer so that then you can bring in perhaps longer lived, more valuable nut trees and food trees that communities can make use of. Humans need trees in multiple ways, and we can't survive if our planet doesn't have vegetation and cover on it. So trees are just the beginning, I think.
Yes, I remember John Bacher's book about Edmund Zavitz's work in planting a billion or so trees in Ontario that had in land that had been desertified, and I think he said that only red pine would grow. The soil had been so ruined that he couldn't plant very many kinds of trees. So he'd start off with these red pine, and once they got going, then you could put more diversified forests in the areas there.
I think this is true. Eric might want to add to this.
Yeah. Yeah, Eric.
Well, I guess I had just kind of heard about this from you, Meta, about a month ago. So looking into it, the first thing that jumped out to me was it's a really exciting, big idea. And I do like that kind of think globally, act locally. And as a forester, you're always thinking about the local site conditions, and if you look at anywhere in the world, local sites are so different, and if you want to get a forest working at 100% capacity, you know, sequestering as much carbon as it can and hosting as much biodiversity and cleaning fresh water and providing resources and recreation for people, the best way to achieve that is by planting the right tree in the right place. And because the Earth's biodiversity and ecosystems are so different, lots of plants are locally adapted, right? So you want to use local seeds that have the local genes for the local areas. And I guess, I mean, one thing that I guess I'm thinking is that there's ways in which you can refine the drone program to make it more local. And I guess the two things for me would be the local and the stewardship. But then, like you said, with things like mining, a lot of sites that have been degraded to a great degree, sometimes just getting anything to grow is a real accomplishment. And so stuff like this, the drone program, if that's linked in with a long-term stewardship program, then it can be effective. I mean, like Sandy said, that, if you plant a barren mine site with trees, Meta, you said we have 12 years. Well, in 12 years, those trees are only going to be the size of pencils or whatever, depending on where it is in the world. So they won't be contributing to climate, carbon sequestration, right? And, but they can start that process of reclaiming the land. And maybe there again, you might not need the local seed as much if the plan is to have something going at the next step.
Okay, now here, this word stewardship is a lovely word, and that's exactly what worries me, because if you shoot these pods in the ground or scatter the seeds on the ground, you can cover a hell of a lot of territory that way, and I imagine you really could plant several trillion trees if you used mechanical devices, but you're not going to have enough people to come back and look after those trees. Now, what I wonder is, to what extent can they survive anyway without, I guess obviously that's going to depend on the environment. You say that grass is going to choke them out, that if you plant them or in a place where there's already grass, that they're not going to survive. So do you go back, Eman, do you go back and spray them with water or, God knows, pesticide, whatever, after planting them? Is there any kind of follow-on activity that can be done to nurture the plants after they've been planted, and how feasible is that?
Okay. Elena, when you want to go ahead and then
what we're really doing is just the same protocol that we're doing first. So we come back, we don't do actively now the maintenance of the plantation. Is something that the communities that we're doing is just they doing once we planting, they maintain their plantation and they control the plantation especially in the case of Myanmar. What we do is just come back with the mapping drone, so we monitoring what is being planted, and we can see what is the problems. For example, we can detect that incredible fast growing of grasses in certain areas where we can localize what is the areas that you can have to do.
How much human labor is involved in the work of following it up? We have, let's say you want 1 trillion trees and you've got 8 billion people, 99% of whom are not going to be able to go out and work in the forests. So you've got just a few people who are going to look after these trees. I want to know realistically, can you find ways of planting large areas of trees that do not require human intervention and protection afterward? Or are all those trees going to die? And you may as well not bother.
At this stage, what we can do is monitoring the areas, and then it could be potentially develop other drone or other system that can spray it or detecting how to do it. But in this stage, the first step that we have to do it is monitoring, and monitoring is mapping, and it's using again a drone. And you're reducing to a team of 2 persons who can plan mapping and all these areas and to get the information of what is the decision that you have to do in that. At the moment, even we can control the weather, we cannot control the climatic conditions that we have. Even, for example, watering. If we're monitoring the areas and we see that, okay, we don't have, or you have it, there is nothing in the market currently that can automatically watering the plantations that we have. What we can do it is monitoring and control and see effectively in the map, in I imagine, we have a certain problem in that area, so we can destinate the people to go into that area, and you're reducing the time and how to control it, and you know very fast where is the problematic area where you have to do an action.
Okay. I'm not hearing anything encouraging about the possibility of scaling this up to thousands of times the size of the operation that you're doing now. That's what I'm looking for, is how are you going to do this if we're going to actually try to get something on the order of 1 trillion trees?
When I just kind of heard about this a month ago. So as I'm looking into it, you kind of think, well, I wish it could work. I hope it can work. Some of the things as a forester, you think about local seed and all this, but the more I guess I'm thinking about this, the more kind of like you said, Elena, I think one of the valuable things about the drones is the monitoring. And for instance, what I study is one of the things I study is local tree seed diversity. So Sadie and I have been monitoring old growth oak trees in the Toronto area. These trees are, 200 years old, so they're resilient to climate change and good for biodiversity. But when we go out to look at the seeds, we have to look from the ground with binoculars up there. It's very hard to see them. It's very time consuming to monitor them. And so what is really the rate limiting step for forest conservation in our area of the world is getting the seeds. But if you could do something like using the drones to help with some of these, LiDAR, different.
Yes. I have a population of trees in the top of the mountain. I'm going to send a team of 5 people to try to see if maybe the population is still there. I can fly the drone and get you the information in 1 day with a team of 2 people. And it's not necessary that you're climbing into the mountain, because we're going to see if the population is there. So after that, you can send people or not.
And so, I think that's really exciting. I think because there's not just like one silver bullet solution. It's almost like this talk, could even be broader, and hopefully will become broader over the years, like the role of drones in ecosystem restoration, not just tree planting, but acquisition of the data, especially acquisition of rare data, things like, seeds, timing of seeding. A lot of things only seed, for instance, white oak is one of the longest living oak trees in North America. Yeah. And it only really produces seeds every 5 to 15 years. So we're talking 10 times a century. So if you miss that one seed event, you might have to wait another decade. And we can't afford to wait lots of decades. So again, I think the drones, might be able to find some really exciting efficiencies there that can help. It's not like drones replacing people or people replacing drones. It's kind of that working together thing.
For example,
I love the idea that, I hope somebody's coming up with drones that can fetch things. Like if you could send a drone to pick off these beautiful seeds just when they're ready from your white oak trees and bring them back to you, that would save a lot of problems, wouldn't it? Yeah. Now, let me ask, let me just do some really brainstorming kind of thing. Here are two thoughts that I'm wondering if there's any potential for linking them to the kind of work you're already doing with drones. One of them is that both Eric and I saw a video recently of something that people are doing in Brazil that are developing little, they look like plastic hubcaps. I don't know whether you've seen these or not, but the idea is that they plant a tree, 2 foot tall tree or something, they put this thing around it, and it collects water, and it makes it impossible for ants to come in and eat the tree, etc. So that the protection of the tree it's a wonderful way of protecting the tree, and apparently they really have a good survival rate. But they are already only putting onto trees that are already saplings. They're not able to put a seed into the ground and have this hubcap sort of thing there to protect it. It'd be wonderful to combine it with some sort of aerial dissemination of seeds.
That is exactly what at the company that I think that you're speaking about is Cocoon. We are speaking about that, and we probably have at some projects of collaboration doing exactly both techniques. So we don't pretend to replacing, because not all the species could be planted by seeds. So some of them, for example, some projects, it could be ideal, is what we begin to speak with them, is just doing restoration, using the techniques, using this plastic that retain the water, and for example, us doing the plantation of other species like grasses in the Mediterranean areas that they are planting. So we can have a combination of both techniques and have very good results, maybe with a combination of the settlings.
Have you started doing anything together yet, or is this something you're just thinking about?
We just speaking about it. Elena especially speaking about it. So I think it's in the near future to do it something with them, especially in Spain.
Well, it seems to me likely that this gadget, this hubcap looking thing, could alleviate the responsibility for humans to come back and keep taking care of these plants. Once they're up and they've got this thing around it, that's going to save a lot of effort. But on the other hand, these are big things, and you can't scatter them the way you can't shoot them into the ground, I think, the way you're talking about on a mass scale. These are trees that they plant several feet apart, and just hope that their survival rate will be better. Do you have any experience with that? And what kind of, how do you expect to cooperate if you're going to develop something where your technique will work in conjunction with theirs?
So we are currently exploring different possibilities and to exploring two other mechanisms, and especially what you say is the size of this mechanism that is big. So for us, one of the main factors that we currently have is our size of the drone. So for us to scale up to using this kind of technology, the drone that we currently have to increase a lot of on size, because we cannot carry that quantity and the size that we have if we are scaling up in size so big. So for having a big drone also, it could be difficult for certain areas because we need more space to landing and we need more space to doing all the operations. So we need to find a balance between this size, this kind of mechanism, and what is realistic to carry on. For example, in areas like in Myanmar is, well, we have a lot of water, but for example, in the mining areas that we are speaking, because that mining areas is still open, do you think that we can go in with a bigger drone? But no, because we have so many restrictions, aerial restrictions, cities, electric lines, that if we go in bigger, we can probably not fly in that area. So we are currently trying to find that balance and understanding what is, if we can applicate that kind of material or system in the current systems that we have combined with the bots.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you about another radical departure from what we've been talking about so far, and that is something that I just came across a few days ago. There's a Japanese man named Miyawaki. Have you heard of Miyawaki? He is he's in late 90s now. He's an old man, but he started a form of reforestation that is extraordinary in Japan, and there are people following him now. There's a company called Forest with 2 T's at the end. Otherwise, it's just the same as forest. And these people, what they do is they identify a whole bunch of indigenous trees. They are very careful to find only trees that really belong there historically. And they make a huge mixture of them, like 50 different types in the same batch of seeds, 50 different species. They are careful to get a combination of trees that are going to be tall, medium canopy, lower canopy, and then shrubs, so that the different heights of the trees are in the same mix. And they produce these things called tiny forests. They will take a piece of land in the city or anywhere, maybe the size of a tennis court, or a parking lot, or anything very, very small. And first they do an amendment to the soil. Unfortunately, I think this is has some aspects of it that don't sound promising to me, because you have to dig up the soil. And what we're trying to learn now with the kind of agriculture that is being advised is not to dig up the soil. But at any rate, they dig up about 1 meter of soil, and they mix in amendments that bring the kinds of nutrients to the soil that might be missing otherwise. And then they plant these trees, which are already saplings, but they plant them extremely close together. They plant 3 to 5 trees per square meter. And then they have to look after them for about 3 years, watering them and weeding them. But after that, they are on their own. And the extraordinary thing about this kind of forest is that they don't replace the trees that die. They, in fact, look upon this as a natural selection process, so that the trees that are competing to survive, and the ones that are healthy and belong there will probably survive, and the others won't. But they don't replace the others, and the point is to create an extremely dense, thick forest. And apparently they grow amazingly quickly. They say, and they showed videos. They say it grows 10 times faster than an ordinary forest. And it is 30 times more dense than an ordinary forest. And it has 100 times more biodiversity than an ordinary forest, and 100% organic. And therefore, I saw pictures of these plants. They're doing them all over the world. And they are very small forests right in the middle of a city or anywhere that have the extraordinary thing is the amount of carbon sequestration that they can do, because they're so close together and they grow so incredibly quickly. What I'm thinking is, would it be possible to combine your technology with this in any way, so as to enable people to produce thousands of these little extremely dense forests all over the world?
Probably yes. So there is no, for example, it could depend on the densities that we want to do in the application in the area. So we don't have limitation on that. And for example, in the number of species that we applicate, seems that, for example, the Australian government is just tending to this tendency to increase a lot of the diversities that you're planting in only 1 hectare. For example, the last plantations that we do in the last season, last month, we're doing a project in Australia, and we planted 65 different species in each hectare. So we have an incredible huge diversity in all this stratification, not only typical plants, forestry. We enter all the stratas of vegetation in the typical forest. It seems it's working. So they tended now to also increase the number of seed seedlings that we are planting, to begin with high density and don't do any kind of replacement in the forest. So I don't see any competition or any points that we cannot follow this tendency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'd be interested in seeing whether or not there could be some mixture of a combination of these approaches. Anyway, Eric, proceed. I'd like to hear your misgivings, because you have oftentimes sounded skeptical. And what are your thoughts about all this and your concerns, Eric?
I think it's a great idea, and I think like Elena and Eman said, it's one part of the collaborative effort to save the world and reforest the world. And I think that I guess for me, the thing that excites me the most is, like, I don't think we can just use drones to go around and plant all the forested areas in the world, because local areas are so complex. The local genes required for the seeds are so complex. The stewardship long-term required, like you mentioned, the trees we planted in Ontario. Elena and Eman, you might not know this, but in the 1940s, affluent areas of southern Ontario, agricultural lands, all the sand blew away. We planted pines because they were the only thing that survived. And then in the 90s, the Ontario government cut the Ministry of Natural Resources, which provides services to the forest. And at that time, everyone walked away from these plantations, and they were planted with like wooden buckets of water and shovels on hot days. And now we walked away from them, and all these forests are dying due to lack of good stewardship, right? And so, but I think the thing that excites me the most is this kind of utilizing the drones more comprehensively for ecosystem restoration. And things like the seed collecting, I think, are really interesting. And one thing I just was writing down when I was thinking about this is that University of Toronto Faculty of Forestry is the oldest faculty of forestry in Canada. It's 112 years old. And one of the first things that we pioneered as forestry faculties do is monitoring. And one thing we did in the 1940s is we invented the beaver float plane. I don't know if you know what the float plane is, but yeah, used all around the world for monitoring forest resources and looking out for fires. And we've written, textbooks on aerial photo interpretation, all this stuff. But what you guys are talking about with the drones is so much more efficient. It's almost like, looking at how drones can come to bear on all aspects of forest ecology and management, even ecosystem ecology and management. And so I think I'm a lot, initially I was thinking mostly about tree planting, which I think at this stage now, it's an idea that's getting developed. But I think that there's so many things that the drones could apply to. And, maybe we often have summit meetings at University of Toronto, and maybe it would be exciting that, have you over here with a larger collaborative group to talk about that kind of.
Yeah. Elena would love to.
That would be exciting, how, we can bring these emerging ideas and these old ideas that are in many ways very similar together and look at where these efficiencies are, right? I think so, it's very exciting for me.
The ecosystem restoration is so big, and there's so many fronts, and we can do in the application of this technology in so many ways. And for example, something that we are beginning to explore for managing is how we can monitor the presence of weeds or invasive species in a lot of areas. So just to give a map to the people who is fighting every day and how we're doing a restoration with you have this weed in this area, this, and this is just increasing the capacity that they have to managing that. Yes, we are planting, but we are not only planting trees, we are planting all the ecosystem, we are based in restoration of the soil, also this is really important, and to monitoring and understand the full ecosystem based in imaging and satellite imaging.
Wonderful. I'm 1,000% in favor of what you're doing. And I think that there need to be about 1,000 other companies doing what you're doing, but I don't think there are going to be 1,000 companies doing that. So my only alternative hope is pinned on the notion that a government can do things much on a bigger scale. The government, if the governments of the world, various national regimes, decided to take this on as a big project, you've shown the way with some kinds of technologies that I think could be applied on a huge scale. And of course, we can ask people who are drone owners who belong to clubs, for example. I would love to explore the idea, and in fact, I called a drone club man to say, how about getting your drone club people to attach these little gadgets onto their drones and go off and plant trees? And well, it took him a minute to say, well, I don't know about that, but maybe so. Anyway, that's a possibility, but there needs to be a scaling up of this kind of project many, many times over. If we're talking about 1,000 billion, then there's a way to go before we're through.
This conversation is one of the weekly series Talk About Saving the World, produced by Peace Magazine and Project Save the World. Please visit our website at tosavetheworld.ca, where you can sign the Platform for Survival, a list of 25 public policy proposals that, if enacted, would greatly reduce the risk of 6 global threats to humankind. Come back next week for another discussion of a serious global issue.